we need to now start thinking about how we are going to um, form this into a pitch that will really resonate. Um, Very briefly, this is something I go into in much more depth in other courses. Part of my goal here is to enable you to present in a way which is persuasive. And part of that persuasion is to persuade people that your evidence is valid. And you know it's valid because you've done the research. But actually, a big part of that is looking like you believe that evidence and having the confidence necessary. And for many of us, that is the key problem. And that is the thing that prevents us from ever actually engaging. And so my message here is if you find yourself at the valley of despair, thinking of all the things you don't know, think first about your expertise compared to your policy colleagues. And if you know something they don't, then that's of use. And therefore, you should have enough confidence to start trying to speak out. And for me, when I look at who is on the peak of Mount Stupid and how confidently these people who've been paid to say things against the evidence are, I realize I need to take my courage in my hands and learn enough to be confident enough to be able to actually go into these policy circles and start shouting a bit more loudly for the evidence from that slope of enlightenment. Um, easy said, um, but harder to do. And so I want to give you a few tips and tricks that will help you to structure a pitch. And we'll come on to the structure of these presentations at the end, but also how to deliver them in a way that will be deeply persuasive, that will actually get people to not just listen to the evidence, but act upon it. Overcoming our confidence issues is part of this, but of course there's much more. I want to start with two stories, which I'm then going to use to illustrate my points. The first big talk that I had to give, public speaking engagement, wasn't to a policy audience. I was a PhD student. I had a teaching assistantship part-time with my PhD, and my supervisor asked me to give a lecture linked to my PhD work to a second-year undergraduate audience on climate change. I very quickly realized that I did not have everything I needed in terms of the broader context to my PhD to actually be able to communicate to second-year undergraduates. I'd left myself an entire day to make a one-hour lecture. Turned out that that was not long enough. And now I'm working into the early hours of the morning, desperately trying to learn as much as I need to actually deliver what my supervisor needs from this lecture, not just talking about my PhD. I come into the lecture the next day feeling sleep deprived and nervous. I start okay, but third or fourth slide in, there's a graph on the screen. I have no recollection of putting this graph into my presentation. It must have been really late at night. Problem is, it's really low resolution, and where I'm standing, I can't even read what's on this graph. And there's this silence that goes on for what seems like an eternity as I'm desperately trying to work out, what does this mean? What do I say? This is really embarrassing. Before I could press next and say, we'll come back to that or something, one of my audience began to heckle me. And I remember to this day, she had this lots of piercings, including one that kind of came out here between her eyes, and she looked properly intimidating. I can't remember what she said, but it was basically something along the lines of, "You haven't got a clue what you're talking about, have you?" Which is exactly how I felt, and I completely crumbled. I went into a panic attack. And I discovered, it turns out, when I have a proper panic attack, I can't even read. So I pressed the next button, and now there was just symbols on a screen, and I've got no idea what to do. The silence now is going on for even more than an eternity as I press next, 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 and eventually I get to the slide about my PhD, and I recover myself. I know what I'm talking about here. I don't need to be able to read, and I start to talk about my PhD. But by that point, my heckler decided to heckle me again. She interrupted me as I was speaking to effectively, again, say, you haven't got a clue what you're talking about, have you? And at that point, I realized I can't do this. And about 15 minutes into this lecture, I put my tools down and I walked out of the lecture theatre. And that was it. That was my first public speaking event. Um, now, I still to this day struggle with anxiety, and public speaking is not the thing that I like most in life. But I have learned a whole load of techniques to help me get by. And so I'm going to zoom on 5 years now. I'm a few years out of my PhD, but I'm still very much an early career academic, and I'm giving an opportunity to talk to the main conference of the party, conference of the parties to one of the UN conventions. It's the desertification one. It's in Argentina, and researchers very rarely get to present to the politicians. You're normally in a committee somewhere. And so this was an opportunity of a lifetime. I'm terrified, but clearly I'm going to say yes. On the morning of my presentation, I'm told you are aware that you have to speak very slowly and have spaces between what you say to give all the translators time to translate what you're saying. And I'm like, no, I didn't realize that. And so my carefully crafted speech, now I'm realizing it's not going to fit into the time. I'm going to have to cross things out. And I've got now all of these crosses and arrows. And that takes me so long that I realize, oh my goodness, I'm cutting it really fine. And at that point, I discover that there's a railway line between me and the conference center. No Google Maps in those days, and I am running now down dead end after dead end. I can see the conference center right on the other side, but I can't get there. Eventually, I get there with 2 minutes to spare before I'm meant to be on. And I get through the first security, and it's second security now into the main chamber with 2 minutes to go. And the security guys say, your badge doesn't have clearance, you can't get in there. And I'm like, but I've got to. Look, I've got 2 minutes. Look, my name, the agenda, here's the time. Can I speak to the head of security? Head of security, eventually, bang on the time I'm meant to be speaking, says, okay, I'll let you in. It turns out nobody had said to the people at the front that I wasn't there. And so I walk in as I'm being introduced. Looks to everyone else like I was just waiting somewhere at the back. And I come into this room and it is cavernous. I've never been in a room like this. And it looks like you see it on TV. There's all these people with their country badges in front of them. And I walk up to the podium with my speech with all of these arrows and crosses all over it. But I had rehearsed this thing, memorized this thing to death. And you know what? I gave the speech of my life. It worked. And we had impact. And in fact, that was the beginning of something that ended up in what turned out to be a 4-star ref impact case study in 2021. And the evidence is there from the actual convention and the policy documents. So it worked. And for me, this was this incredible turnaround. I was still terrified, but I had courage. And I'm going to suggest that courage, by definition, is doing something scary despite the fear. If it wasn't scary, it would not take courage. And I'm going to suggest that some of the things that I'm going to share here will help you, whether or not you feel confident naturally, or like me, you actually suffer from anxiety and you get panic attacks in front of large groups of people. Even you can actually pitch in as scary a context as talking to the politicians of the world. Not something that you're likely to get, but you never know. And so I'm going to give you 5 simple tips. These are evidence-based, in some cases based on peer-reviewed literature, but this is based primarily on interviews with and accounts from TED Talk speakers. So if you've not heard of these and you want an example of what a good pitch looks like that is evidence-based, have a look at some of the researchers who give TED Talks. Because ultimately these are the ingredients that you need to be able to persuade an audience of your evidence and how they should respond to that evidence. So my first of 5 points is that you need to have crystal clear purpose and to communicate that to your audience from the outset. So I've told you, you're going to be able to pitch these ideas, which are evidence-based, to an audience who will not only listen to your evidence, but act on it, and you'll have the confidence to do that. If you have got your audience right and you think this is what your audience needs, then instantly I've got your attention. It's not just I'm going to be able to do this now, it's the confidence thing as well, perhaps, for some of you. But you have a purpose that you've researched, you know your audience, and you're pretty convinced, yeah, if I tell you this is what you're going to get, you're now sitting up and listening. And if that's not clear enough yet, then I make it absolutely crystal clear. This is the tangible benefit. You will be able to stand up in front of a policy audience, even as scary as the entire world, and have the confidence to communicate in a way that could get you a ref impact case study. This is now even more tangible. Yes, I want that. If I want that, now I'm paying attention. This is about how you grab people's attention instantly. So this is what the benefits are. Now, this is my purpose, this is the benefits, and this is why, if you're still not convinced, this is important. Part of this, though, is more subtle. You need to give your audience a reason to trust you. And the second of my two stories was designed to give you just that trust. A confident person can tell me, someone who suffers from anxiety, how to be confident, and I'm not going to listen to a word you say. Someone who suffers from anxiety might actually be able to talk to someone like me about these issues. Someone like Mark, who has actually presented successfully to an audience like this, yes, might actually know what he's talking about. But I'm doing this in a way which is much more subtle than bragging about all of my credentials. Stories are very good for this, but think about other ways in which you can explain your purpose, but in such a way that you are building in your credibility to that. And that could just be the logos on the screen that are sitting behind you. Yeah, so we're subtle, but we're clear. It is not only is this something you want, but I am someone who can give this to you. Because without that second bit, yeah, I want that, but I don't think you can give that to me, so I'm still not going to listen. And so that means if you're a PhD student, you don't describe yourself as a student, you describe yourself as a PhD researcher. This is the group I'm attached to. These are the people who are funding my research. Yes, I am only doing my PhD, but you can still trust what I am going to tell you. And we give people that certainty, that comfort of knowing what's coming next. So I am going to give you 5 points. And by the end of these 5 points, you'll have a greater sense of how you can confidently pitch. And we'll talk about some of the structures and stuff after. But you know where you are. 1 out of 5. So the second of these 5 points I'll spend longest on, because for me, this is the most important of the 5 points. It is this idea that I've been talking about from the beginning, that we need to know our audience without being able to empathize with the constraints, the challenges our policy colleagues are under, with what they actually need, then we're never going to be relevant. And so knowing, understanding your audience is absolutely critical. And ideally, we're going to research our audience. We know who is in that audience. We've invited specific people who we know are there and we know what they're interested in. But in the worst case scenario, if I come into a setting where I don't know who is there, then I will go to the back row and I'll sit next to someone and I'll introduce myself. So cool, why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of today's session? And if I have time, I'll come early enough to talk to a few people. And now, yes, this is just a small sample, maybe just that one person in the back row. I don't know what they have come from. Now, if no one else, I can talk to that person and meet their needs. And there's a quality to how I speak now when I talk to the needs of one person compared to just generically trying to please everyone. That means that I am able to just finesse my language to create that empathic connection and to adapt what I'm saying and how I frame it in ways that are going to make it more relevant. So what are their concerns? What's motivating them? How can I adapt, even if that's on the hoof? And one of the most powerful ways that the evidence suggests you can connect with an audience is through stories. And that's why I started with those two stories. But not all stories are created equal. There are certain characteristics that the most powerful stories that stick with people longest have in common. Stories with impact have something personal. So there was something slightly personal and vulnerable in sharing my first car crash experience that gave you that sense of, yeah, maybe Mark's a bit like me, or at least was a bit like me, and I'm not some distant professor. There's something unexpected. You don't expect someone who appears as confident as I am to tell you that they suffer from anxiety and that they've had that level of car crash. And there's something visual about this. I leant into the screen, lifted my glasses to try and get you to visualize how intimidating the face of my heckler looked. And I tried to paint a picture of this cavernous hole and these people with their country labels in front of them. So this would stay in your mind. And there was something visceral about this. It was about engaging with the emotions, whether that was that cringing or that sense of, wow, it worked at the end. Um, and ask yourself, how might you turn your research into a story? Simply by talking about, yeah, this is why I was interested in knowing the answer to that question. This is why I'm personally invested in it. And now here's a story about how we eventually came to find out what the answer was to this question that gets people hooked with something personal. There's unexpected twists. Yeah, there are visuals, whether they're visual metaphors or pictures of what you did, that get people, yeah, now I understand and I'm connected and I'm personally connected and invested in what you're saying. But it could just be a story about how you got to the venue that day that subtly explains who you are and connects with your audience and something that just creates that empathic connection. But think about the power of stories. There are lots of ways in which we can ask you focused questions. So I've presented this as a bunch of policy options, but if you were in the shoes of the people affected by this kind of issue, then what would you want people to do? How would you want to be heard? How would you feel in their shoes? And what we're now doing is we're getting them to put their shoes, sort of themselves in the shoes of the people they are meant to be serving. And this becomes much more personal. I can't just say, well, that's interesting, and it's this kind of detached thing that I might have to think about intellectually. I have to think about the reality of this, and I have to think about what if this was affecting me? Now this is, again, much more personal, and I'm having to relate to this evidence in a way that matters to me. Your body language matters. I've tried to use open, positive, energized body language. I've tried to keep my hands within the screen for online. And we're trying not to just pull people's eyes away from us with our body language, or to have body language which is very closed or defensive or nervous looking. And what happens is that your audience begins to mirror you emotionally. And think about how this feels. If I'm listening to someone who is just, really, just, I can see this person's in some kind of emotional pain and they're just so painfully shy. And I begin to feel that shyness for them. And yeah, just spit it out. And you can't help that. And actually, if there's a nervousness that you're feeling, it creates a nervousness in your audience. You now begin to wonder, actually, can I trust what this person is saying? Whereas if there's a confidence and an openness in your body language, it engenders a confidence in your audience and an openness of heart and mind to what you are saying that actually really matters, I would argue. And the central point I'm going to make now, the third point, builds on this, which is to say that confidence really matters, but you have to not overplay this. So this is about standing on your evidence and there being a quiet confidence that gives you an authority that the lobbyists they are hearing simply does not have. Now, one of my favorite public speakers is Barack Obama. Don't read into my politics necessarily about that, but when you hear him talk, there is this quiet authority to what he says that engenders confidence in you as a listener. And we have here a televangelist. And despite being an evangelical Christian, there is nothing more than nothing I hate more than being shouted at by a preacher. And I've literally walked out when I have felt like I have been shouted at by a preacher, because nobody wants to be shouted at, condescended, and that sense of aggression just is a turnoff. And so, what we're trying to channel here is a sense of authority, and I'm going to suggest, controversially, passion, but a positive passion for why you love what you love and why you care about these issues, but without ever having to depart from the evidence. It's about your tone of voice very often more than anything else. And I'm going to look at tone of voice, but also posture. And so if we are on a stage, be aware of your feet and where you walk. So I'll attempt to demonstrate here. I'm going to have to raise my desk for this. I'm going to start with that purpose in my home position, typically at the center of stage. Listen to me, and this is what you're going to get. Now I'm going to make my first point, and to do that, I'm going to walk over to this side of the stage. And that process of walking over, I'm pausing, letting the point sink in, giving that space to what I'm saying. And here's my point. A quick aside to that point, and now we're going back to that point. Great. Now I'm going to make another point on the opposite side of the stage. And maybe it's an alternative perspective, a different approach. And eventually we're going to conclude at the center of the stage. And the whole time, when I'm standing, I stand solid. I was given some training by a voice coach who trains politicians, amongst others, how to speak persuasively. And she analysed us all. Some of us were pacers. And so I'm trying to listen to what you're saying, but you keep walking in front of the screen. And it's quite distracting. And I'm not really listening to what you're saying because, yeah, it's just, would you just stop and let me focus on what you're saying, please? Other people were swayers, and I just can begin to feel slightly sick now. And I hope you don't fall over because I'm sitting in the front row here, and there's a kind of a nervous energy here. That makes me feel slightly unsure of what you're saying. And actually, maybe the way that you're swaying in the wind is like your message, which is going to sway in the wind and you're standing on shifting ground. Metaphorically, this is not the rock solid of the evidence that you're trying to communicate. I was in the most embarrassing category. So I was kind of all twisted up and slightly contorted, and she said, basically, you look like you need to go to the toilet, Mark. And that nervous energy was conveying that sense of nervousness in my audience, which she would argue is problematic. So they're subtle things, but I'm going to argue, added together, they create this sense of solidity. And for me, this is things that I have to consciously identify I do these things. And now I have to do an act of the confident person who does all these different things in terms of how I speak, how I move my hands, how I stand, for example. And that's not natural. It is an act, but it's just surprising how my nerves catch up with the act. So I said I talk about voice. And your emphasis, your intonation does really matter. So if you care about every word in a sentence, let's pronounce each word of that sentence and not just keep trailing off. I might slow down to spell out that key point without shouting at anyone, without being intimidating, but I now really get that point. I can use volume sparingly. In particular, there is that hushed quiet. You've heard me kind of almost whispering, but there I'm conveying something different as I speak in that quiet tone, perhaps as much as something more noisy. And I'm trying to vary my intonation. There's nothing more boring than a flat tone. Most of us actually speak like that in real life, and that's okay in a conversation, but not in a speech. Of course, you can go overboard with this, and all of a sudden I sound like I'm a TV presenter. I sound completely fake. But I hope you've heard me varying my intonation enough to be interesting, but not fake. And of course, you can add in that pregnant pause that just again just gets everyone listening to what's about to come next. And this sounds very theatrical, and a lot of people start to object at this point and say, "Yeah, Mark, but that's not me. That's not authentic." And I want to just stop and address this point because how do you talk to your parents? How do you talk to your children, or to just children of a certain age? You change your language. You don't use complicated jargon. You might speak a bit slower. In my case, I might use a more strong Scottish accent and some Scottish dialect when speaking to my mother-in-law, for example. um, and that is completely appropriate. It's completely natural. It's completely authentic. I'm just channeling different parts of myself, my father self, my son-in-law self. They're all me, but I'm just adapting to my context. You have a professional self. And in the same way that you can get better at talking to children, you can learn how to talk more effectively with your mother-in-law. You can, I would argue, learn how to talk more effectively, professionally, and to shine up and hone that professional voice that you have, and it still be authentic. And I hope that I'm coming across as authentic, and yet you can see how I have attempted to hone that and shine that to be clearer. The fourth of my messages is to keep it as simple as possible. What is that key one memorable message? And come back to that message again and again. You may have many additional points, and you're going to come at this now from those different points. Great, but it's a sub point. And so you're getting this idea, hopefully, that this empathic approach, starting first by understanding the people you're trying to serve, that's my core point. But from that, you perhaps then realize, oh, there's this thing called this 3I analysis that I need to go and look up later. But yeah, that is the method that I'm going to use to identify the right people to go and speak to. And yeah, I see all these different sub messages as they come in. But I now build up my message, and they keep all repointing back to that core message. So if I remember nothing else, I remember the core message. And with luck, from that core message, I go back out to those sub messages and I convey more. But less is more. And that's a hard one for most of us as academics. Finally, as I said, I practiced and practiced in front of audiences, in front of cameras, to get me that feedback. Yeah, how can I hone this speech? I quite often will memorize the first few words of a speech and the last words, so that I can give people eye contact and say the memorized bit before putting some engaging visuals up, so that people aren't looking too closely at me, because I am actually going to start reading sections. And I've read this enough times that I can do so very naturally. I've kept revising this text, so no, that's not how I speak. I'll write it like this. I've memorized a few bits, but that for me is a fail-safe, which means that I'm not going to ramble. If I do have a panic attack, I can just literally read until I'm calm again. But ask yourself, what can you do to keep your nerves in check and to get this as polished as possible? For me, I still do this, but it's arms and ums, and I try so hard to get rid of them, and I don't always succeed, but I'm so much better than I used to be. But if you listen to how I've been speaking, you'll notice that every now and then I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say. There'll be a bit of a pause, or I'll talk more slowly as I'm trying to work out what I say, rather um, than talking with quite a few arms and ums between what I'm saying, just because I'm trying to think, yes, that's the point. Instantly, I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. And I still am struggling just as much to remember my point. but I do so with confidence when I just slow down or have pauses and try to practice and practice again rather than using the verbal fillers. Um, I also have a habit of speaking too fast, and I still struggle with that one. People whose English, for whom English is not their first language, regularly complain. And for me, that's, there's a thing. I'm going to pause between slides. That's a key thing for me to help me slow down enough that you can hopefully keep up with me. I'm going to suggest that no slides are better than bad slides, and a lot of us have bad slides. Your slides should not be your prompt. If you need prompts, then have some cards or have it written out in front of you. Don't put it on the screen. And the reason for this is very simple. You've got mixed messages. So I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm not fully listening to what you're saying because I'm reading. But I can't fully focus on reading because I'm listening to what you're saying. And actually, really annoyingly, I can't just blank out what you're saying because it's related. And actually, they're kind of similar, but slightly out of sync. And actually, you detract from the message. Far better to have nothing at all and give everyone eye contact, or just read a well-written speech than to have a whole load of words that are conflicting with what you're saying on the screen. Of course, far better to have images, visual metaphors, those keywords, or a style like this, an infographic style. But ideally, here's the infographic style. Ideally, we don't just speak to a bunch of words. Now, I'm going to conclude with an internet meme. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but a few people who have found childhood photographs who have then gone back to the place and tried to recreate them as adults. So this is Ella, aged 2, wearing her mum's shoes in her mum's front garden. And here is Ella, aged 22, wearing the same said shoes in the same garden with a few more mature trees behind her. And I want to use this to illustrate this idea of the visual metaphor and its power, to just sum up and to say that this is ultimately about empathy, which is by definition putting yourself in the shoes of your audience. To have impact, you need to have purpose, connect, be authoritative and passionate, keep it simple, and polish your shoes regularly. So, time for some thoughts, questions. Over to you. We're going to conclude briefly with some thoughts around the different kind of structures you might choose to structure that content. But Angela instantly has put a clap hands emoji. And when I do this in person, I get a spontaneous round of applause when I finish. And that's not normal. At least not for me. There is this like, oh, there's something with impact by finishing with a clever visual metaphor. And I'm not trying to big myself up here. What I'm trying to do is to say, look, here is a presentation that I've thought a lot about, that I've crafted over many years, that has been designed to not only communicate those 5 points, but in theory to illustrate them. And if I got that right, then in theory, this should have had impact. And you should be able to remember what you've heard. And you should now be ready to take action, no matter what the barriers are that would otherwise prevent you. That's the theory. And of course, I could be vastly wrong. So let's have a look at the chat and see what you've got. Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca. And I think a lot of us, I rarely meet an academic who doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome. Anxiety maybe less so, but there are all things that make us scared. And public speaking, depending on your audience, can be scary for us all, no matter how senior we might be. Ooh, that's a good question, Lynn. I'm going to have a think about that. Does anyone else want to share a TED talk that's stuck in their mind from an academic? That's the key thing. Because what inspired me with TED Talks was going, these are just other academics. It must be possible to do this. I'm an academic. If you can learn how to do this, surely I can learn how to do this as well. The voice coach, I forget who that was now, but I have done a webinar recently with a very good voice coach who is also an academic. who is I would particularly recommend because of that link. She's an academic and a voice coach, and I can't remember her name either, annoyingly. However, she blogged for me, so if you can go to my blog and scroll down, you'll see somewhere um, something about that. Ooh, there you go, Sonia Livingston. Angela, what's the topic?
So, talking about children and media literacies.
Right,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, good. So, Jean, when presenting, how much time do you spend practicing or rehearsing to get that intonation and emphasis the way you want? Um, and do you ever include off the cuff elements? Um, so, yes. So I guess the first thing is it depends on how high the stakes are. So the higher the stakes, the bigger the potential impact, or how badly it could go wrong, is how much I will rehearse, how much I will memorize. And this can be down to the level of hand gestures. So, for example, yesterday was my last public talk, and it was at a funeral. So, a funeral is a high stakes scenario in which to be giving a speech. Um, and for this one, I wrote it out. I memorized the first sentence. I also memorized the sentence where I was going to have to turn the page. And in it, I did have an off-the-cuff element. So I knew there was one part of it where I would need to link to the person before me. And I had an instinct that I needed to make an empathic play to my audience. And I wasn't quite sure what it was, and my sense was I'm not going to know. All I know is between these two paragraphs, I need to say something that links to the previous talk and my audience. And it became quite instinctive. It was a bit of a nerve-wracking thing. I had a few ideas of what I might say, but instantly it was, yeah, the memory I'm going to share, I know is shared by many of you who have experienced this of this person. And that was I knew there was something missing, but I knew that it was when I was going to stand up, and that needed to be natural, looking at that audience and saying whatever was going to work in terms of that empathic connection. And as part of it, um, there was a metaphor of a tree, a verse I'd been asked to read about trees, and my sense was I need the hand gestures, and so I decided, and I practiced ahead of time, that I am going to outstretch my hands, and I said to myself, you are going to feel nervous, and you are going to really feel self-conscious about this, so you're going to practice putting your hands right out as far as they go to visualize the tree, and then you're going to bring them in, and you're going to talk about that feeling of sitting with your back against the tree, solid against that tree. And so, yeah, thinking through what is the body language you're going to use and actually scripting it in and rehearsing the body language. Yeah, but also having some off the cuff elements. It is possible. Alicia, if you're pitching to a board or committee and everyone is sitting down around a table, is your advice to sit to be part of the group or to stand to command attention? Um, for me, this depends on your positionality in relation to the group. Um, are you trying to say, I am one of you? I'm no better than you, I'm no different to you, and that is the source of my power. In which case, I might want to sit down. Do I feel that actually there's an unhelpful power dynamic where I am an old white male professor and there's something intimidating about that that's creating empathic distance and I want to get around that. So actually I'm going to take my suit jacket off before I come into the room and I'm going to sit down rather than stand. On the other hand, actually, perhaps yeah, my personal characteristics mean that I feel that I'm not going to be taken serious. So I'm actually power dressing for this, and I'm standing, maybe with a pen in my hand. I'm using all tricks in the books to say you can listen to me. I have authority, and I'm communicating that with my clothes, with my body language, with my standing. And that is actually the barrier that I need to overcome more than that empathic barrier. But I do so in such a way that is not distancing. It's not, here's me and I'm really fancy and adore me. It's here's me, and I can relate to you, but you also need to accept that I have authority here as well. And that combination is a real challenge. And perhaps in my experience, it tends to be my female colleagues who have this experience more than my male colleagues, sadly. And if people want to share their tips, whatever your characteristics may be, in terms of how you gain respect, the respect that you deserve of an audience, despite those characteristics that may create prejudice against you, whilst maintaining empathic connection. That's the challenge. Yeah, the power of stories. I got an opportunity to go back to that same audience, the desertification conference, a few years later, and I created a story as a vehicle for this that was very carefully calculated, and so this was knowing, as I did at that point, my audience a bit better, the kind of people who are senior enough to have a seat in one of those halls are of a particular age. That age means, statistically speaking, they are much more likely to be parents or grandparents. And so we've got a majority of this audience now who are parents or grandparents. And this was a talk about the links between climate change and desertification. And so I started with a picture of a girl called Sophie, who was the daughter of my interpreter that I worked with in the Kalahari during my PhD. And then I used her story in a location that all of the models suggest is going to be devastated by climate change and the links between desertification and climate change. To say, yeah, let's not just talk about model outputs and graphs and maps. Let's talk about Sophie's future. And at the end, I finished with, is it a palindrome? A story about coming back to that story about Sophie and about her future with my call to action. And it scrolled down as I read. It was a video of the words that I was saying. My take-home message is this. As you're going through this, you're like, yeah, it doesn't sound quite right. It kind of sounds almost the opposite of what you would expect. And you're slightly confused, slightly surprised, and then it stops. And then it starts moving the opposite direction. And I read each line out the opposite way around. And it ends now with this call to action. That all of a sudden makes sense. And it's all about this story about Sophie. It's about making it personal. And again, this was a fictitious story about Sophie's future, but it was a calculated story to try and connect with that audience. So another illustration, perhaps, given that is a key take home for some of you. Good. So almost time up, but Jack has another question. So you talk about how you might need to challenge expectations, for example, standing up and being authoritative if you feel you may not be taken seriously. Is there particular power in surprising people or upending their experience? And if so, can you use a negative presumption to your advantage? Yeah, that is my sense. But quite how to do that with impact, I've yet to learn. One of my hardest audiences is farmers. A lot of farmers make a lot of assumptions about me that I believe climate change is. So this is not to be prejudiced against farmers, I hasten to say, but my hardest farmer critics assume that I believe climate change is real, that I'm on the left side of the political spectrum. That I am anti-farming, and that I would like to see nature see fields make way for nature, and they're instantly opposed to me, not going to listen, and ready to jump down my throat. It turns out that they're correct in some of those assumptions, but what they don't understand is that I live in a rural landscape. That my children go to a farming school, and are friends with farmers. Many of my closest friends in that community are farmers. And that actually I believe passionately in the cultural heritage and in the belief that that rewilding needs to be as much about repeopling landscapes that we have in places like Scotland and the hills that I'm looking at, as it should be about nature coming back. So taking some of those assumptions and then all of a sudden breaking those down and saying, oh, so maybe you are on our side, can be quite disarming. And so this is about calling out the critiques that are wrong and actually turning them on their head, rather than just allowing them to be unspoken and held against you, I would argue. So do enjoy the rest of your day. Do stay in touch with me. If you want to find out more about my policy impact training, if you want to book me to come to your university, there are some courses that I still run myself. I have a much larger team now doing courses, but all of my courses are available via the link in the chat. So do stay in touch, whether through the newsletter or any other way. It's been a pleasure working with you today. Take care.